Escort carriers were built to ferry aircraft, until hunter-killer groups used them as mobile ambush clocks that never stopped, and wolf pack habits unraveled in the mid-Atlantic dark. Subscribe. New World War II investigations every day. Before dawn on a Sunday in early August 1943, a barometer needle on the flag bridge of an American escort carrier steadied under low stratus, wind force 4, mid-Atlantic, roughly west-northwest of the Azores by 600 nautical miles. The chart showed nothing but soundings and weather arcs. No land-based patrol could reach this rectangle the size of a small country. Land-based patrol. For 3 years, this had been the U-boat's safer water. Surface at night, charge batteries, close the convoys from the shadow of the air gap, and dive at first light. The old rule held that once a wolf pack slipped into this gap, only destroyers and luck could interfere. The first rupture arrived not as a destroyer wake, but as a pencil line on a plotting board in the carrier's Combat Information Center, drawn from a single sweep of 10-centimeter radar mounted in a torpedo bomber's belly radome. The aircraft, an Avenger from a composite squadron built for convoy escort, not fleet strike, was flying a creeping line-ahead search at 3,000 feet, ground speed 100 knots, fuel to loiter for near 3 hours. 100 knots. The radar operator read a faint return at 5 to 6 miles off the starboard bow of his track, inconsistent with whitecaps. The pilot marked a datum and began a descending turn. In the air gap, the old calculus assumed darkness, and distance protected the submarine on the surface. The new mechanic ignored both. Metal wavelengths that coastal sets could not use at long range now painted a surfacing hull clearly enough to vector an attack long before the U-boat's bridge watch could pick up an engine note. The witness objects that recorded the change were prosaic. A ship's logline on the escort carrier noting First Contact Airborne 0342. An after-action report page initialed by a composite squadron lieutenant with a simple grid. Port page, initial sonobuoys laid, Circle 4 pattern. A decoded signal summary from a shore station later in the week indicating a missed befail to concentrate at a far western rendezvous. And, back on the hangar deck, a maintenance card that listed 2 items, only the Lee light inspection lamp bright and the ASV set within tolerance. None of these were built for drama. All of them pointed to a rule eroding in real time. The decision that locked the trap was signed weeks earlier, but became visible in the next 20 minutes. Task Group 21.14. A hunter-killer team centered on a small carrier with a deck barely long enough for a bomber had been loosed from convoy duty and told to range the gap itself. The human lever was a rear admiral in the Atlantic Fleet's anti-submarine command, who authorized independent patrols by escort carriers instead of tying them permanently to convoys. His order, routine on paper, turned a defensive umbrella into a roaming weather system. It freed flight decks to hunt, not merely to cover. Tactically, the carrier imposed measurable pressure. Aircraft could launch in deck loads spaced at 5-minute intervals, each section taking a sector line with a lateral separation of 5 to 7 miles. With 10-centimeter radar, detection ranges against a surfaced submarine rose to around 8 miles in low seas. With the Lee light, the final half-mile of darkness became daylight on demand. The naval airmen carried depth bombs fused to explode at preset depths. And, increasingly that summer, an acoustic homing weapon that did not need a perfect placement to be fatal. Against a submerged contact, the aircraft would drop a ring of sonobuoys around the datum at 500-yard spacing and hold the submarine down until the screen of destroyer escorts arrived. The kill zone now extended beyond gun range and beyond daylight. It was a moving geometry of arcs drawn from a small, slow carrier the Germans had not believed could matter. On that August morning, the first Avengers run missed. White plumes rose in a short bracket and fell away into spindrift. The aircraft did not leave. Fell away into spindrift. A second section picked up the track line 10 minutes later, turning from north to east with a steady descent to 500 feet. The pilot snapped on the lee light as the radar return sharpened, and the beam hammered the ocean into a stage. A conning tower flared and knifed down. The bombs fell in a stepped pattern set for 50 and 100 feet. The U-boat went deep, and the Avengers switched from ordnance to persistence, laying a buoy circle while broadcasting a contact report on the group frequency. The carrier's ship's log line recorded course to contact, speed 15, while 2 destroyer escorts increased to flank and began zigzags to cut the triangle to the datum. Increased to flank, the hunter-killer group had stitched together airborne detection, sustained localization, and surface prosecution into one act. On the U-boat side, the surprise was procedural, not only technical. Night surface running had been a necessity for batteries and for speed. Diesel power on the surface tripled what submerged propulsion could do. In the air gap, this was habit. The habit now produced a target profile perfect for 10-centimeter radar that ignored sea clutter and for a search doctrine that did not rely on random encounter. Surfacing too early risked radar detection. Surfacing too late risked spent batteries at dawn. The wolf pack's timing window shrank to a slit. Dawn. The first prosecution of the day ended with oil streaking the surface 2 hours later, and a 3-page after-action report stapled to the squadron's daily summary by dusk. The document did not claim certainty. It marked probabilities, course corrections, and fuel remaining on landing. Yet the combined entries from the flight deck to the radio shack to the screen commander's notebook showed a closed loop the submariners had not faced in this water before. The hunter-killer's ability to remain on station for days, to cycle aircraft every hour through dusk and into full dark, and to vector the surface screen by plotted bearings stripped the gap of its main protection. Time without eyes. What looked like a single contact was already part of a rhythm. The Escort carrier's operations board had green chalk lines scheduled through the night and into the next day. First launch 1 hour before sunrise, recovery 30 minutes after. Evening cycle beginning 2 hours before sunset, extended with blackout deck procedures. Ready deck alert aircraft armed with sonobuoys and depth charges, engines warm. Fuel state mattered, weather cells mattered, but the deck routine carried on. When the carrier altered course at noon to keep the wind over the bow for the next launch, it moved not toward a convoy, but along a predicted lane of U-boat traffic, reconstructed from high-frequency direction, finding bearings recorded by other. From high-frequency escorts over the previous week. The trap was not one ship or one weapon. It was a schedule applied to open water. By late afternoon, a decoded signal summary reached a shore station indicating scattered U-boat reports of aircraft in the west and carrier suspected. That message would not reach every submarine in time. A second contact, logged at 1920, followed the same arc of detection, localization, and pressure, until a destroyer escort dropped a tight pattern and the sea boiled brown with fuel. A destroyer escort. The old rule said the gap could be crossed with calculated risk if the pack moved smartly and stayed low by day. The contradiction, written in 4 separate witness objects before midnight, log line, AAR page, radar plot strip, signal summary, was simple. This was not an isolated encounter, but the new baseline. The order trail began on shore, not at sea. In late spring of 1943, the newly formed 10th Fleet in Washington assumed central control of anti-submarine warfare in the Atlantic. Its staff consolidated intelligence from high-frequency direction-finding stations, convoy commodores, and British Western Approaches reports into daily situation estimates. A short memo signed by a rear admiral on the 10th Fleet Staff authorized small escort carriers, ships under 20 knots, converted or purpose-built, to leave convoy leashes and patrol pre-computed U-boat traffic lanes as independent hunter-killer groups. The paper looked routine. Its effect was structural. Flight decks, once tied to a single convoy lane, now ranged across hundreds of miles, guided by bearings drawn from radio fixes and by decrypted traffic summaries that suggested rendezvous points. Western Approaches. Command at Liverpool adopted a parallel model, releasing support groups with their own escort carriers to counterattack wolf packs rather than sit inside convoy columns. Two headquarters, on different shores, converged on the same idea. The rollout moved by railcar, winch, and chalk line. 10-centimeter radar sets left stateside factories in wooden crates, their waveguides wrapped in oil paper, and traveled under guard to naval air stations at Quonset Point and Norfolk. Lee Light assemblies arrived as separate boxes: generator, lamp, controls, each stamped with a maintenance card showing bench tests and carbon arc alignment checks. Composite squadrons trained in Rhode Island and Maine on creeping line-ahead searches, then ferried their Avengers and Wildcats to the carriers by short coastal hops. Deck crews chalked parking grids on planked decks, measured lashings, and rehearsed night recoveries using hooded wands. Bureau of Ships production tallies for the quarter showed a rising curve of escort carriers delivered, each immediately assigned to a task group number and pushed into the mid-ocean timetable. The doctrine was plain English, dressed as a schedule. A hunter-killer group would steam along predicted wolfpack axes derived from the prior week's radio bearings and convoy sightings. Aircraft launched in pairs every few minutes, flew parallel search tracks separated laterally by several miles, and used 10-centimeter radar to find surfaced shapes that did not behave like waves. If the contact dived, the aircraft laid a ring of sonobuoys at fixed intervals, listened for screw beats, and called the surface screen to box the datum. Day or night, the deck kept the wind over the bow, and the next section spotted, so that localization never rested on a single aircraft's endurance. Reliability was not absolute. Sea states above a moderate swell degraded radar returns. Rain clutter confused ranges. The acoustic homing weapon had limits on target speed and depth. But the aggregate effect, expressed not as a gadget but as a cadence, was that submarines found above the thermocline could be chased into exhaustion while batteries ran down. Case Study 1 fixed the pattern in early summer. In late May, near the longitude of the Azores but well north of them, a hunter-killer group built around a Bogue-class escort carrier received a high-frequency direction, finding cross-bearing from two outlying escorts. A short U-boat transmission, triangulated to a patch of sea the size of a small county. At dawn, the carrier launched a 4-plane search fan. An Avenger at 3,000 feet marked a faint return and descended. The radar operator called a steady pip, and the pilot threw the lee light in a climbing turn that burned through mist at a half-mile. The bombs bracketed a wake. The submarine went under. A ring of sonobuoys went into the water at pre-measured intervals, and the surface screen altered course to the datum. Over the next hour, the U-boat tried to slip out by changing depth and heading. The bearing drift on the buoys betrayed it. The destroyer escort commander logged a tight pattern at the last fix. Oil and wreckage came up within minutes. The composite squadron's after-action report, 2 pages with a hand-drawn grid and time marks, creditably assigned the kill to combined air-surface prosecution and estimated battery exhaustion as the decisive factor. The witness objects that day were unadorned. A radar plot strip taped into the AAR, a destroyer's attack plot on onion skin, and the support group's daily log noting a reduction in HF transmissions in that sector within 24 hours. Reduction in HF. Case Study 2 turned the geometry against a bottleneck. In mid-July, a separate group centered on a core-class escort carrier patrolled a lane west of the Bay of Biscay, where outbound and inbound submarines habitually cross the shelf edge. British shore stations at Coverack and Malin Head reported a flurry of short signals from boats ordered to sprint the bay at night. Western Approaches dispatched an escort carrier support group to the shelf break, while the American hunter-killer slid along the deep water side. The two operations did not formally merge, but their arcs overlapped. On a moonless night, the Avenger crews used the lee light to burn down the last seconds of darkness, as U-boats broke the surface for speed. The radars, immune to the METOX sets carried by many submarines, saw hulls that believed themselves warned. Within 48 hours, 3 contacts were prosecuted to recorded oil slicks. One boat was forced to scuttle after repeated attacks. Survivors later picked up by a sloop. A decoded signal summary, redacted and delayed before wider release, showed the German command warning boats that a new type of aircraft radar was in use and advising shorter surfacing intervals. Shorter intervals meant less charge in batteries and slower submerged transits, an arithmetic loss at the hunter-killer timetable exploited. Case Study 3 captured the doctrinal pivot in autumn. In late October, a support group under Western Approaches, with the escort carrier HMS Tracker and a mixed screen, was detached from direct convoy protection and sent to pursue a wolf pack reported ahead of an eastbound slow convoy south of Iceland. Swordfish and wildcats lifted into heavy weather and flew searches barely above the white line of the wave crests. The radar returns were dirty. The crews adjusted by shortening search legs and accepting smaller coverage. Aerial rockets were trialed against a U-boat attempting to fight on the surface with heavy flak. The rockets missed clean but forced the submarine to dive at once. The destroyer Escorts, already mid-turn to the datum from buoy bearings, closed and dropped a ladder pattern. The contact faded, then returned weak and wandering. Hours later, debris marked the spot. Tracker's deck log recorded aircraft serviceability falling below plan because of spray damage and corrosion. Nonetheless, the group held the lane open for the convoy without a single successful attack on the merchant columns. The witness objects here were a maintenance summary listing saltwater ingress faults, a range table for the rocket trials, and a convoy commodore's brief noting that no torpedo tracks were reported over 2 nights in waters where, the month prior, attacks had been frequent. The opponent adapted in visible ways. German boats adopted radar detectors and changed antenna arrays. Some turned into flak traps, remaining on the surface to engage aircraft with quadruple mounts and heavier guns. The detectors worked against meter-band sets, but were mostly deaf to 10-centimeter wavelengths. The flak tactic bled crews and left boats exposed to lee light attacks that stripped away the advantage of night. German staff officers tested a snorkel to allow submerged diesel running and reduced exposure on the surface. Where snorkels appeared in late 1944, they lengthened pursuit times and reduced the clean, bright radar picture that had made the first months so lethal. Even then, snorkel heads left small signatures that careful radar operators learned to recognize, and the endurance math under snorkel use still punished speed. A mid-act contradiction forced refinement. Escort carriers were small and slow. In heavy Atlantic weather, their decks pitched beyond safe limits. Aircraft bent landing gear, skidded toward crash barriers, and sometimes went over the side. Skidded toward the very cadence that made the trap work, near continuous launches and recoveries, demanded precise ship handling and consumed spares faster than planners predicted. The acoustic homing weapon, treated by some as a cure-all, had strict envelopes. Above moderate depths, at certain target speeds, it lost effectiveness, and the groups risked friendly fire spirals when radar pictures stacked with multiple aircraft, escorts, and confused IFF returns. A 10th Fleet advisory in late summer, attached to a weekly doctrine note, urged stricter emission control near convoy columns and restated deconfliction procedures for attacks near screening ships. The system did not run on heroics, screening ships. It ran on checklists tuned after failure. By winter, the authorization to operations loop had shortened. Daily traffic from HF direction-finding nets was summarized by noon, hunter-killer groups diverted by mid-afternoon, and aircraft were over suspected lanes by dusk. Production tallies showed more escort carriers entering service, each with a composite squadron drilled on the same pattern. Rail manifests for radar crates and spare magnetrons flowed steadily to East Coast depots. Shore schools issued new maintenance cards with revised inspection intervals for Lee light generators after field reports of arsing. Nothing dramatic in a single line. Field reports of accumulated. The lines described a machine that converted intelligence into patrol arcs, and patrol arcs into pressure that did not lift at dawn. On the U-boat side, crew letters seized later and summarized by naval intelligence told of surfacing windows squeezed to minutes and of batteries that never quite recovered. Their doctrine, night surface sprint, day submerged approach, was still on paper. At sea, a carrier deck the length of a short city block, and the schedules it enabled had taken the paper and folded it into something else. The hunter-killer groups did not win by surprise alone. They made surprise routine. By early 1944, the arithmetic in the North Atlantic tilted. By early 1940, monthly returns compiled by the Allied anti-submarine staff showed U-boat losses climbing into the double digits, while convoy losses shrank to single ships, often stragglers or vessels detached with mechanical trouble. In March, an escort carrier group centered on USS Block Island patrolled between the Azores and Gibraltar and destroyed 2 submarines in 5 days. Its daily war diary noted, "No convoy threatened." In May, a hunter-killer led by USS Bogue sank 3 boats in 1 patrol, its flight deck log recording cycle after cycle of Avengers airborne for less than half an hour before plotting contacts. These were not accidents, but continuations of a system already routinized. The immediate outcomes were visible in ports as well as on charts. At Liverpool, the convoy arrival board in June showed columns entering almost without loss. In New York, manifests of inbound convoys logged record tonnages of oil, tanks, and food, delivered without the attrition familiar in 1942. Aerial reconnaissance photos taken over Brest and Lorient that summer showed more U-boats tied up idle than at sea. The pens remained intact, but the sorties logged by German staff shrank. Decrypted signals summaries from B-Dienst captured desperation. Boats ordered to disperse, to hunt in the central Atlantic or off the Azores, only to meet patrol arcs already waiting. The operational ripple extended beyond convoy safety. Destroyer escorts that once strained to guard every merchantman could be reassigned to invasion buildups. In July 1943, Operation Husky had already benefited. Troop convoys to Sicily crossed lanes once lethal, shielded by roaming escort carriers. A year later, for the Normandy landings, the bulk of assault shipping sailed under the knowledge that the U-boats were suppressed to the margins. The pressure of hunter-killer groups, combined with shore-based air extending from Greenland, Iceland, and the Azores, meant the Atlantic could be treated as a highway instead of a gauntlet. The Germans tried to alter tempo. In early 1944, snorkel-equipped boats left French ports with orders to remain submerged for entire transits. Contact reports dropped, but so did effectiveness. An Allied intelligence bulletin dated February noted fewer convoy attacks, boats increasingly evading, not striking. Escorts adapted. Radar operators learned to spot snorkel heads, and flight crews adjusted search legs to focus on likely lanes. Where snorkels forced longer submerged runs, Allied air still harassed surfaced batteries at choke points. The tactical contradiction, escort carriers unable to fly in extreme gales, remained, but convoys timed routes and hunter-killer groups shifted lanes. The sea that had once belonged to wolf packs was carved into predictable arcs of patrol. Legacy took several forms. The first was doctrinal. Both U.S. Navy and Royal Navy treated escort carrier hunter-killers as proof that small decks could impose oceanic control without battleships. Post-war carrier aviation studies cited task group war diaries as evidence that air power could deny a sea space independently of surface fleets. The second was technical. 10-centimeter radar migrated quickly into civil aviation and meteorology. Its reliability rate logged above 90% on maintenance cards, demonstrating that compact microwave sets could survive at sea. Acoustic torpedoes, first tested clumsily on Avengers, informed post-war designs of homing weapons used against both submarines and surface craft. The long tail extended into Cold War patterns. In the late 1940s, NATO exercises in the North Atlantic used surplus escort carriers as training platforms for anti-submarine warfare groups. Escort carriers, as their flight decks, small by later standards, trained generations of crews on routines born in the air gap. Creeping line-ahead searches, sonobuoy grids, radar watch, and persistence over heroics. Even into the jet age, manuals cited the Atlantic Gap experience as the seed of continuous coverage doctrine. By 1945, the outcome was measurable in absence. Convoy Commodore's reports listed few, if any, successful attacks. U-boat crews scuttled boats in surrender harbors from Trondheim to St. Nazaire. The Atlantic, once the most lethal route on the planet, had become a controlled lane marked by chalk lines on carrier decks and circles of buoys on open sea. The final image, recorded in a ship's logline at sunset on May 8, 1945, shows Task Group 22.3 lying to in calm seas, flight deck silent. Avengers lashed down. Wildcats canted at angles. Avengers lashed. The Atlantic rolled back into still water. The rule that night protected the U-boat had been broken 2 years earlier. It never returned.